Okay.
For your time, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Well, Giants, we are live in the Tribe of Giants here with JP Morgan, not the banker, the other one.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation at a dialogue online. We wanted to bring it here to have the dialogue in person rather than doing it through text or messaging, because the message gets lost a lot of times. And the question that we left off with was around Martin Heidegger. And I don't know much about Martin Heidegger, but I'm going to dive in. And the question that came up was around the ideas that were generated in JP around the work of Martin Heidegger, and specifically in relation to the Giants message. So,
yeah.
You good to pick up on that?
I will, man. Yeah. Basically what Martin Heidegger, as a philosopher, did is he helped people to see that the things we took for granted, like being an experience, we were taking it for granted as to what it was. We were just assuming that there was an object here, a subject here, and an object out there, and those things were separate and they were completely independent from each other. And just because, I had ideas in my head didn't mean that that thing didn't exist without me. And Heidegger is basically like, that thing only exists if you're present. So like a really simple example would be if a tree falls in the woods, and there's nobody there to hear it or see it, typically people say, did it make a sound? But Heidegger would say, or the question, if you would ask Heidegger, is has it fallen? It would be like, it's an irrelevant question because there's not even a tree unless there's a person there to create the tree with their mind.
So here's the
language.
Yeah. The visual that comes up is Schrodinger's cat. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And even in video games now, they don't even build the world until you walk into that world, and then it appears based on the movement of the character, right?
5 minutes before this call, I was playing mini golf with my friend in Scotland in my Oculus VR headset.
Yeah. Okay.
So exactly that. Yes.
Yeah. And we'll get, I'll pull comments on as we move forward, but yeah, it's the idea of physics. Until it's observed, there is no creation.
Yeah. And so I love that. My background is physics. I studied physics and math at university. And so I've always been fascinated with that kind of stuff. And Heidegger is basically, he had a role to play in in discoveries in physics, actually, too. His philosophy and his way of thinking informed some of the physicists in the 19th century, their way of thinking as well. So there's certainly a link in what you said, not just as a metaphor and as an example, but like literally these lines of thinking are related. But I like to, so my life is really about like deep philosophy and super pragmatic, modern, like what does that actually mean as a dad and in business, making money, helping people. And so I thought a great way to like answer your question, which was like, how does studying this dude Heidegger like made a difference for you in your life, which is essentially what you're asking. Like, what's the impact of this? Which I love.
Even more than that is, how have you manipulated the information in a way that it serves you? Because you've probably studied Heidegger pretty deeply.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example that's context independent, and then I'll make a specific example of it with your work of Giants.
Yeah.
So one example is, so I'm reading his book, Being in Time, which is a beast of a book. So it's like super thick. It's translated from German. Like I'll read like a page and I'm like, my mind's melting. And anyway, there's this point where he's talking about like, at what point is a chair touching the wall? Like some people would say if it's like an inch away, it's touching the wall, but it's like not literally touching. And me, the physicist, well, not even the physicist yet. There might be somebody that's more like literal, and they'd be like, it's not touching the wall. There's a gap. So they'd push it against the wall and they say, now it's touching the wall. Then the physicist walks in and be like, actually, there's still relatively a lot of empty space because those atoms aren't actually touching. And now you go in, it's like, when is it actually touching? You like jam it into the wall, and it's like, well, there's still space.
Yeah.
So the idea of touching only exists in the language and the concept that is experienced by a human being.
Right. Okay.
And so when I saw that, I was like, there's literally, and that applies to everything in our experience. There's never a point. And so I talk about like with clients, like, when do you have money? Is it when you've got an invoice out, or is it when it's paid? And so when it's paid, is it when it's like pending as a deposit, or when it's posted? Or is it not even when it's in the bank, but when you take the cash out? And like, is it when you're holding it in your hand or in your wallet? Or like, do you have to eat it? When do you actually have the money?
Right. Yeah.
And so there's never a point at which anything is actually the case. It's only a point at which we experience it as such. And so that's what I was understanding from him. And then I was like, holy crap. I don't know how far to go with my language. Sorry.
You're okay.
Yeah,
Any language
okay, cool.
As long as it serves. So
yeah. Holy crap. Like, to have something categorically is only and always an experience.
Huh.
Whether there's $1 million in the bank. I mean, and as soon as you think about that, you're like, well, shit, there's people that have millions of dollars in the bank and they live as if they don't have enough money or don't have money.
Right.
And there's people that have, their bank account says nothing and they live as if they have everything they need.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's how that works. And so the way this impacted me is I have known for many years, and you probably are familiar with this, that if you can create the imagined experience of having something, I love that Giants can say shit. If you have the imagined experience of something, then that can create the energy and it leads to the action, leads to you creating that in the material world. Right. And so I've understood that if I can create the imagined experience, then that can help me to create the actuality. But what I always found challenging is like, there was part of me that's like, yeah, but it's still not the real thing.
Okay.
And so that created a little bit of gap, which sometimes would limit my capacity to create the imagined experience because like, am I just fooling myself? It's not really the thing yet. And what this insight did is it collapsed the actuality into the imagined experience. And so I no longer have the conflict if it's like, I'm imagining it to really get it, because all I ever have is imagining it. That's all I ever get. And so it's made it so much easier for me to live in the end result now.
Let's go to that, because I love what you're hitting on here. The idea that the only thing you can ever do is imagine it. And so even if it's in your present moment, you're still imagining it as the experience that you're having with it, whatever that thing is, right? Yes. And so going into the idea of physics, right? The physics says that things can exist in superposition. Mm-hmm. Even in 2019, the University of Vienna found that they can superposition a mass of atoms, which means in our case, there's a possibility that our world as we see it could exist in multiple universes simultaneously right now, right? So the imagining of it is what brings it into this reality, and however you want to experience it, positive or negative, is how it's going to come into your space, but it's only always imagining.
Exactly.
So whether it's past, present, or future, going into Einstein's theory of relativity, it's not there is no past, present, or future. There's rotations of the sun, but we measure time in that way. So the idea is that future event, it doesn't exist out there. It can only exist always right now, because when you get to that rotation, you're going to be in that space. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That's it. Yeah, that's it. From a physics angle, that's it. And for the non-physics geeks, like obviously you're one too, so that's cool. We can riff on that. But like for the regular people, like, let's go to being a giant. Yeah. Right. Like in my program, I have a program called Being a Client Magnet. I'm sure there's lots of overlap with what giant is, right? Because when you're a giant, you're magnetic, but people will sometimes slip up and they'll call it becoming a client magnet. And I'm like, nah, there's a big difference. Becoming a client magnet is the idea that client magnetism, giantness, is out there in the future. That the only thing you're doing is coming to it, but never arriving. Is that right? Okay. Yes. And that will go on forever. Yeah, gotcha. Because the only time you're ever being a giant is in the moment of your being a giant. Yeah, gotcha. Huh. Since I've read your book, I've added to my morning declarations, I am giant. I love it. And there's a difference between speaking that as an idea to get to and speaking that as the actualization of a state of being. Yeah. So let me ask you on that, because I want to hear this. A person that has doubts around that, on being a giant, I am giant, as it already is, versus somebody that uses a bridge statement like I am learning to be a giant, or I'm becoming a giant. That learning or becoming puts you in a constant state of becoming. Yes. Never being. So as soon as you make the declaration, which is what you're doing, that I am that thing, then you're immediately that thing. Now, how does that work with capacity? Do you grow into that capacity, or how does that work? So when all I'm ever concerning myself with is right now, because there is no more giantness that I'll experience other than the giantness that I'm experiencing now. Okay. So it's the same thing as having, like, when is the chair touching the wall?
Right.
It's touching when I experience it as touching, and when I don't, it's not. If it has a tree fall in the forest, only if I experience it. If I see it, I create it in my mind.
Right.
And so I'm being a giant when I'm living in the moment as the expression of that idea.
Yeah. Okay.
And you could say, but then the more often you live as the expression of that idea, maybe through consciousness, through reading inspiring stories and activating that in your body.
Yeah.
There is the story that over time that becomes more of a default predisposition way of being.
Yeah.
But that's like a different dimension of looking at it. If I concern myself with building up my capacity to show up in a default way,
yeah, wow,
getting myself out of the moment and into time.
Yeah, it puts a person in the position of the how to. So
yes, yeah,
you're trying to figure out the mechanics of it when I look at the body and the way that the body supports a new behavior, and that the oligodendrocytes come in and support the myelin sheath and create the neural pathways and the chemical signals that they fire faster and faster. Like what you're stating is that process isn't your concern. Like it's supported as you live into the thing. And correct me if I'm reading this wrong, but as you do the thing, then your body adapts to that being. Mm-hmm. So as you be that thing, then your body is designed in such a way that it'll fill in the gaps and start to support that way of being. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple, yes, that's it. And I love your depth in science. It's super cool. But it's like, if you're learning to nail a hammer, nail a nail in with a hammer. Yeah. You're not like swinging the hammer at the nail, trying to like become a better nail hammerer.
Yeah.
You're just like, I just want to get this nail into that board now here with this swing.
Yeah. Okay.
And if it doesn't work, okay, now this swing.
Right.
And it's like, and that's the way that I relate to speaking as an act of creation is like, every time I open my mouth and words come out, it's like swinging the hammer and hitting the nail. And all I care about is, does it go in now?
Yeah.
If I concern myself with like being I'm going to miss, I'm going to bend it. I'm not here. The now result.
Yeah.
Like this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the fear comes in, is that trying to figure out the process. Right. Most of our overwhelm comes in trying to design the process, not the vision. The vision of it, there's no fear at the vision. The fear is in the overwhelm of how to. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I go from where I am currently to that world, that reality? And that's where I feel the anxiety and the overwhelm.
Well, that's why I love the idea of a giant, is because giants don't ask that question. They just move. They're like, where's the path? They're just like, I'll just make the path. Right. And it's a great metaphor. I mean, when you're a giant, you embody that. It's natural.
What's beautiful is, so when he puts him on his shoulder and he sends him home to think about it, he doesn't grow when he draws out the mechanics of becoming a giant. He grows when he sleeps. So when he lets go of the mechanics.
Yeah, I got that. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. If he had to figure it out, it would be overwhelming. He'd probably never do it. And so going back to Heidegger, did I say that right? Heidegger?
Yeah. Heidegger. I don't know. I'm not German, so
I'm not either. Yeah.
It sounds good to me.
We'll do our best here. His philosophy is a lot like Schrodinger's, of that until there's an observation made, the thing doesn't exist. So until we experience our world, which experiences the definition or the meaning that we give to the world, then it doesn't exist. It's just, there can be an event, but that event could have no meaning.
Yes. And what you're talking about, like the meaning piece, Heidegger talks specifically about language.
Okay.
He distinguishes us from animals because we have meaning lives in language. And it's our capacity to have language that gives us meaning, which creates being.
Yeah.
So being is, in Heidegger's language, is like the expression of meaning applied to whatever you're perceiving out there in the world.
It's so interesting. Of all the animals on the earth, we're not the ones with the most neurons, but it's that ability to speak that distinguishes us from other animals.
Yes.
Elephants have almost 260 billion neurons compared to our 86.
Yeah.
Which is a substantially larger amount. but how come they're not creating spaceships? And my son said it's because they don't have hands.
maybe they know where it ends. Who knows?
Yeah.
But just even our language, knowing is a conceptualization. And I love what you said. Like, it's because we can speak. I mean, I read once in a book called The Spell of the Sensuous by a guy named David Abrams, I think. He's a scholar, and he was talking about how first we sang and first we danced, and then we sang, and then we spoke, and then through our speaking, that language that sounds we use to represent things like like bottle, right, water, not beer. That became symbolic, and then what happens is those speakings would echo in our mind, and that external dialogue became internal dialogue. And so the symbols started to live within us. And they created our this new map that we put on reality called conceptualization and meaning. So
even that word meaning means accepted by many. If you go back to one of the translations of it, and even spelling is casting a spell. It's like interesting that we use these words in such a way that they collectively make sense to us. We know what's being talked about. But like what I love about this, so somebody said, well, how do we know they're not speaking if we can't understand animals? But I get that.
Well, that means how do we know they're not communicating? I'm sure they are. We know that they are, actually. Yeah. When we say speaking, we're talking about like language and meaning in as the human kind of version of it.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I use it too. So if we were to give it an operational definition, but I want to go dive backward a little bit into. So you've got this creation around that. So you have this recognition that nothing exists outside of your observation, and even in your observation of it existing, it's only imagined. Because the reality of it is that there's so much space in the atoms. If you were to take all the space out of the atoms in every human in the world, they say it'll fit in the size of a sugar cube. We can compact all the human race down to the size of a sugar cube. So that construct, or that idea that it only exists as we imagine it, and it can't exist anywhere but in the present. So whatever you want to be, like you describe as a future thing, can only exist in the right now, no matter when that is. Am I accurate on that?
Yes, 100%. Yep. And it also brings up the Matthew effect. Have you heard of the Matthew effect?
Yeah, sure. I don't know it the way you're going to describe it. So.
Well, in the book of Matthew, there's a verse that talks about to those who have more will be given.
Okay.
And to those who have not, all will be taken away. And it's like a trippy verse for some people because they're like, wait, that doesn't sound fair. But like it's in the Bible in a few different places, and I found that interesting and inspiring. And then if you Google it, there's actually a Wikipedia page about it, because there's an economic and just social thing that's called the Matthew effect, and it's basically named after this scripture, because it's like the more a person has, the easier it is for them to get more. Like if you give them more money, you can invest and create relationships. People that get funding in scientific research tend to be the ones that get more funding, and so it's kind of like a natural phenomenon, right?
It's kind of like gravity is what it sounds like to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you get mass, you attract more to you.
And so for those who don't have, if you only look at the externality of it, that's kind of a bummer. Yeah. It's like the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And it's kind of a bummer until you realize that having is only and always an experience. Then you have a back door. Because I can have all the money in the world as a state of being. And what happens when I live as the expression genuinely, not like both baloney, but like really felt and lived, I have all the money in the world. What happens is money starts to be an easier thing for me to access. Right. And the world rises to meet the vibration. And so the having as a state of being is a means of creation for me.
Wow. Yeah. See, and I see this in biology, like going back to the idea of the cells and how they're supported. It's that when you go into that space of having and you repeat that behavior over and over, then the world kind of accommodates and comes in and supports that, builds the structure to support that and hold it in place, right? Am I accurate in that?
Yeah, you are. I mean, I think that's like, there's a lot of people that talk about like the law of attraction, and like if you
Yeah.
can vibrate it this way, then you will attract it or create it or manifest it.
Yeah.
I think the challenge for people is, how do you vibrate with something that you don't have? And this
Yeah.
is what Heidegger has given me, is he's annihilated that issue, that concern, because he dissolved that distinction that there's this or that's the experience, and then there's a real thing. That illusion is what creates the conflict that cuts people's access off from things like the law of attraction and manifestation and vibrating as a means of creation.
So the reality is only always an illusion.
An experience.
An experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Imagined experience, we could say. Now, I want to make the distinction that doesn't mean that I don't also believe that there is something out there.
Yeah.
I just don't think that we have any access to it other than the conceptualization that we create through our perception and our meaning.
So here's a beautiful thing around that. And you tell me how we were doing on time. We're about 20 minutes in. So
yeah, no, we're good. I've got time. Yeah.
Yeah. Consciousness is a thing that science hasn't been able to explain, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at the structure of the photon, how it exists in wave form until it's observed, and then it becomes immediately a particle. And it all depends on how it's observed. And they're creating quantum computing around this now, and showing that how you want to observe it is exactly how it shows up in the world. But what's beautiful to me is that beyond all of it is this consciousness, that system, that algorithm was designed around that consciousness, because without that consciousness, that photon wouldn't change from a waveform to a particle. So it just says that consciousness always exists beyond all of it. So whatever you perceive as your identity here, as you think is your consciousness, that identity, that experience of who you are or what your world is just an imagination.
Yes.
But your consciousness is still aware beyond all of that, and has the ability to shift your world. Going to a quantum level, it has the ability to shift your world in a way that I love this, you could only imagine, right?
Yeah, beyond what you could even imagine, well beyond what you could imagine.
Yeah, wow.
Because we can imagine within the constraints of our concepts, and how things we've got the ideas that we have, and then everything kind of builds upon everything else. But like, I feel like I'm not an expert in these things, but when my mind is still and I'm quiet, things that appear to me and things become obvious beyond, it feels like it's something greater than imagination. It's like there's an access point that's like, I didn't imagine that, just showed up somehow.
Okay. Yeah. Can we dive into that a little bit? Can we go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. I think there's something, there's a, maybe it is, you could classify it as imagination, maybe, but I'm distinguishing a different experience between the act of visualizing as imagination and the arising of an insight when I'm not engaged in kind of linear internal dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. It's be still and something shows up, spirit, intuition.
I'm loving this. I'm digging this. Chaos, the word chaos comes from the abyss, from the darkness. And there's this idea that the Big Bang, when that happened, it came from that darkness. But the thought is that there are multiple Big Bangs occurring constantly right now, all around the world. And like ideas, Einstein, that's where our conversation started, was he didn't create the theory of relativity. He uncovered it.
You said, I like that.
It was already there. So it popped into his reality from seeming nothingness, but it downloaded from somewhere where it already existed as it was. And it became this creation in this world. And it could have come from his observation of it as a possibility. I mean, as a possibility, he could have created relativity based on his observations, like a thing that didn't exist until he observed it that way. Or he simply uncovered something that was already there and he didn't have access to it because of his observation. And so these ideas, when we get into that quietness where it creates that void, that abyss, we have these ideas spontaneously appear in our mind that Rick Evans and many others say is like this download that occurs. And this information comes into your space that wouldn't occur without that quietness.
I like that idea more and more these days, especially because of how much, things. When I was in university, computational physics was kind of my focus, and I was creating fractals inside of a computer. Do you know what a fractal is?
Yeah. I love fractals. Yeah.
And so the science of emergence and fractals and how things like from chaos, order just emerges. And then at a higher level, there's more chaos, then order emerges. But these levels of order and chaos, they have symmetry. So this level of order has symmetry with this level of order, the whole sandwich of chaos in between.
Yeah.
Right. And so how does that work? I mean, who knows? But that shows up in nature.
Yeah.
And so it would make sense to me that what's emerging on the planet technologically is a new level, from that chaos, there'll be a new level of order that emergent that is synonymous with maybe the order of our neurology, or the order that emerges from our neurology. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's just layers upon layers upon layers.
I went on a walk yesterday. I took my dog out and we were walking down the sidewalk. And the sidewalk is self-similar to the road, which is a little bigger, and the road is self-similar to a highway, and the highway is self-similar to everything else. The fractal nature of that says that energy flows through that fractal. There were receivers called houses, receptors, kind of like a cell that people park their car in this receptor called a house, and they go in there and they recoup, and then they come back out like energy forms, and they go back out on this fractal called a road. And they have self-similar machines that move them around called cars that are similar one to another. And so in scale, you go from a bicycle to roller skates or a car, they're all self-similar, but they create movement. And so we mirror in our world the biology of our body, which is also a mirroring of the universe and networks and river systems and all of it. And like Mandelbrot's equation, it scares the crap out of me in a way because there's no end to it. But at the same time, it's exciting because there's no end to it. So our capacity isn't limited.
No. Yeah.
The way we think. And
I
love where you're.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you like talking about this deep stuff too, but I also want to like spend some time talking about like the book, which I know your book and the theme of giants, because it's really, as I said before we started, like it's really personal to me and I loved it. And it's related here. Because like our potential is unlimited is expressed in the idea that we can be a giant. Yeah. And I said that like we can talk about Heidegger within the context of being a giant. Yeah. Okay. And so I'll give some backstory to why this is relevant for me. I'm about 5'8". Okay. My dad's 6'6". So he put me in all the sports that he was good at. I was like the 11th player on the basketball team. I sat the bench for like 6 years in CYO. We have the same name. He named me Jama Jr. He was Big John. I was Little John, literally into my 20s for everybody in my family. And so from a very young age, I had the idea that there's a big version of John and a little version of John. And it was a thing for me. He was a cop. He had a lot of power, deep voice. And so power and size was like just a dynamic. I got pushed around and bullied when I was a little kid and went to a new school. And so I got like, I need to be powerful because I'm not big. I'm not big. I'm not a giant. And so I learned martial arts and I got smart in school and did well in academics. And, I've made out well in life, but as I've gotten older, I realized that a lot of my strengths and successes were a reaction to the deep-seated idea that I'm small. And it would be, especially around men that were taller than me, it would activate. And I literally for years into my late 20s, whenever somebody was taking a picture and there was other men, I would just do this right before the camera went off. I literally like put stood on my toes so that I didn't look short. And there were like things like money was kind of attached to size. So I would like, if the guys had a lot of money, I would feel small. And so it was through the work I did with our mutual friend, Steve Hardison, discovering that I was living as the expression of like, I'm small, in a way, a healthier response, but still deep down, it was a fear. Yeah. And letting that go and forgiving myself cleared the space to actually see that I wasn't small. Intellectually, of course, I would know that, but it's about being like, well, here's what you intellectually know, but like how are you actually operating? Yeah. And so I've created a lot of freedom for myself. I don't feel small anymore. Yeah. And what's interesting is like I meet a lot of clients via the internet. And this has been the case for years, but more so now than ever before. is that when people meet me in person, having met me online, they always say, man, I thought you were a lot taller. And so, which is interesting because even before when having this hang up, there were aspects of myself that had developed to compensate for the fear that I'm small, that were bigness, right? My, very extroverted, bombastic way of speaking, like just, aspects of my being were tall, were giant, much more so now that I've let go of that kind of inner child fear. But my point of sharing it is that if you're experiencing a person via the internet and you don't know how tall they are, you experience their height through their being.
Yeah. Wow.
So like, where people are actually experiencing giantness in a literal sense. And so being a giant, to me, it's a beautiful example of the possibility that a person can be in such a way that they are actually seen as physically larger. Like they literally are. And people are like, shit, it's like, they feel bad. I'm like, no, that's awesome. Yeah. I'd rather create the experience that I'm a giant than be 7 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I fit into more clothes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the whole purpose of the book anyways, is that you step into your potential, and it's not about physical size. It's about what you're capable of creating in this world. And the beauty of the process of the giant is that you'll become a giant in one area of your life, and you'll go back down that same process again and feel small in another area and become a giant in that area of your life. And it's like, it's never ending. There's no end to that process. I don't ever want to stop learning. I don't want to say, I got it. I just got the last piece of information. I'm done, because I don't think that is possible. There's always going to be new information that comes in. I want to know that too.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea that if I get the information and learn, then I can be a giant in that area of my life is like, there's a point when the chair is actually touching the wall. And so what I'm saying is being a giant is only and always a state of being.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow. I like how you brought that around. Yeah.
And I work with people now. It's like when they're stepping into a new industry, like a lot of times I'll work with attorneys. They're just drawn to me, I guess. And then they move into coaching. Yeah. And they were like, being billed out like $600-700 an hour in New York. And now they're like charging $60 an hour as a coach. I'm like, just bill the same rate.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that. Why? It's like, why not? Just be that. Just be a giant. You don't have to like slowly grow. You can just go to bed, wake up a giant, to riff on their story.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. I like it. Well, thank you, man. Anything else you want to share around this?
That was everything I had in mind. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to go back through it because there's some things I missed because I thought, wow, I got something really cool to share. And now I want to go back and see what I missed. And I wanted to share. It's cool.
Yeah, if something else comes up after you watch it, let me know. We'll chat more.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you. Appreciate your time.
I appreciate you, Nick. This was really fun.
Yeah, you too. All right, man.
Brother.
Take care.
Bye.
See you.